back to the channel. You've been following along with the build series. You'll know we're putting together Hong Kong Model's 1/48 scale Avro Lancaster. In the last episode we covered the main construction of the model, and I even left you with some teaser footage of the model in primer. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you how we went about doing that. We'll also move on to laying down the camouflage colours and putting the markings down as well. So what we need to do first is basically get all our surfaces nice and clean. So I'm using some airbrush cleaner here. It's basically a case of going around and wiping all the surfaces to remove any fingerprints, any residue, or any dust that we've acquired through sanding. You could also use IPA or even just washing the model underneath a tap. So it's just a case of going around, making sure everything's nice and clean. Once we've done that, we can then mask up. So you can see here we're just masking up these gaps in the wing roots, just to avoid any overspray. We're going to prime today by using Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 Black, because I've run out of grey, and we're going to thin that using some self-leveling thinner. So the paint ratio I tend to use to start off with is quite dilute. This is about 70% thinners to about 30% paint, and the first coat we put down is nice and light and misty. So what this does is basically provide a good gripper coat for the subsequent paint coats to go onto. So the second coat we put down is our covering coat. And then our final coat is going to be our heavy wet coat. And what this will do is basically, because we're using self-leveling thinners, this bit gives enough time for the paint to level out and provides us with a nice smooth finish. If you do find you've got any texture in your paint, a top tip, if you come back in with just neat thinners, so what I'm doing here is I finished painting, there's still a little bit of paint left over in the airbrush cup itself, so I'm just going to mix in some leveling thinner with that, basically creating some dirty thinners. And then what we can do is if you just mist that over the surfaces, it will basically melt in and smooth all that out. So now we're moving on to painting the wings, but before we do that we're going to mask up the radiators, which we've already painted. So just using a bit of foam just to block that off. And then it's the same process that we sprayed the fuselage, so the first coat going down is going to be nice and light, second coat is going to give us our main coverage, and our third and final coat is going to be a heavy wet coat. So now we've got the tailplane. So what I've been saying throughout this build is the fit of the kit is quite tight, so the tolerances are quite tight. As you can see here, this is actually friction fitted together and it holds itself very well. But my main concern is if we start painting these parts, if we start putting paint in between the joining surfaces, we could have a problem later on when it comes to gluing these in place. So what I've decided to do is basically paint it as you see here. And the benefit of that is when we come to take it apart and re-glue it back together, we've got plastic to plastic joins, so it provides us with a nice strong bond. And you can see here I've managed to get some paint splatter on the end of the tail, but to solve that all we need to do is flood the area with more primer. This may look a bit heavy handed, but don't worry, it will dry back, as you'll see later on. So here you go, I've managed to stick my finger in this bit here. So we're going to come in again using a heavy coat of primer. We'll leave that to dry. It's not quite taking care of the issue. So what I'm going to do is come in with just neat leveling thinner. Just flood the area and again just leave that to dry. So now we've got everything primed up. You can see the results. So we've not lost any of the panel line detail, we've not flooded out the riveting. The Mr. Surfacer and the combination of leveling thinner provides us with a fantastic finish. So there's a good opportunity now that we've got some paint on the model, so we can check to make sure that we're happy with all our sanding and rescribing that we've done. We can also check any seams, and again this is a good point. If you do need to go back and sort anything out, this is the point to do it. Just checking things over. Quite happy with the top seam on this fuselage, that's turned out really nice. Just checking the underside. Just a little bit here we need to take care of, but we can just sand that out. But generally speaking, quite happy with the rest of the finish. There's maybe a couple of areas we need to pop the rivet detail back in, but that's not too much of an issue. Just checking the seam on the front. Same thing again, just need to add a bit more rivet detail to there. And here's our tailplanes we managed to get fingerprints over. So using that technique we've got rid of that. And again, just test fitting the wings. The beauty of this kit is we can take these wings on and off, makes it a lot easier for painting. Certainly fits in my spray bay a lot easier. Once you do get the wings fitted, it's quite a large lump on the bench to actually manhandle and show you guys, so I've managed to stick it together here, just to give you an idea of what we've got so far. Certainly starting to look like a Lancaster now. So now we're going to move on. We're going to fit the canopy at this point, but we need to paint the area behind the actual pilot itself. So what we're going to do is start by mottling in some colours. So I'm starting off here using some MRP sand, which is quite a light buff colour. And the technique I'm using here, so we're basically mottling the paint on. What this is trying to achieve is basically giving us some depth to our paintwork. So it's just a case of building the colours up till we're happy. Now I'm coming in here with some sea camouflage brown. Same technique again, just building up that mottling. And then once we've done that, we can come in with our overcoat of the dark earth. This is by AK Real Colours. First time spraying these colours, quite impressed with them. They go down really well. At this point, this is thinned quite heavily, so it's only about 10% paint to about 90% thinners here. Now we're going to finish masking up the rest of the canopy using our mask set from Art Scale Kit Distribution. We covered the use of this mask in the last episode, but we've got these side windows which I've had to install. The kit gives you two options for the windows. You get the side bulges or you get the flat side windows themselves. Just check your references as to which version you want to use. So it's basically a case of putting the masking down. We've got a couple of areas which we need to fill in using some mask oil. What I'm using is some micro mask. The best way to use this is basically thin layers. So rather than putting one thick heavy layer on, which tends to shrink back and peel up as it dries, if you put a couple of light coats on, you shouldn't have a problem. So there you go, that's the mask set. There's the part number there, M48006. Bit of information about the company, based in Czech Republic. And they've got a website there as well, so go and check that out. Got some really nice products on there. So now that we've masked up the canopy, we can go about fitting it. So what I've done is actually sprayed the dark green, following the camouflage pattern we're going to put over the top of the canopy itself. And I've also installed the radar receiver, which we need to do before we fit the canopy. So now we're going around, we're just basically wiping the inside of the canopy, making sure there's no dust or fingerprints on the inside. And then once we're happy with that, we can run a bead of glue. So like we've been doing before, we're using some micro crystal clear, which is basically a PVA glue that dries crystal clear. And then we can offer the canopy up to the fuselage. No issues here at all, a really nice fit. You can see the glue coming out the sides there. I'm not too worried, it will provide us with a nice seal. And we can just clean that up using a moistened cotton bud. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to put some tape over it just to hold it in place while it dries overnight. I'm using a bit of paper here just so I don't get any masking tape on the actual canopy masking itself. So we can leave that to dry and come back to it the next day. So what we're going to do now is we're going to paint the interior frame colour. So we're using XF69, the NATO black. Just a case of going around getting this framing painted in. What this will do is basically provide us with the interior colour. As we look through the canopy, we'll see this colour first of all on the inside. So now we've done before, we're going to start mottling in some colours. We're starting off with the MRP sand. So the reason I'm doing this technique, you'll hopefully see in the next episode when we come to the weathering stage. So what I'm trying to show you here now, unfortunately I don't have any footage of further mottling. So in the dark earth areas we've used a mixture of sea camouflage brown and RAF marking red, and on the green areas we've used more of the sand coloration and also RAF middlestone. This is just basically starting to outline the camouflage pattern itself. So now we're going to follow the instructions. We're going to use AK real colours. So this is the dark earth and the dark green. Really nice to use paints, go down really well. They do need thinning quite a lot, which is a good thing, good value for money. What you'll see here is I've actually thinned the paint using rapid thinner, and it's about 30% paint to about 70% thinner. Although to be honest, I found later on in the build I was actually putting down about 20% to 80% thinner. So it does thin down really nice. And the same technique again, we're just slowly building up that colour variation, using the kind of mottling technique. And as I say, we're just outlining that camouflage pattern before we come in with the masking to lay down the dark green. So now we're moving on to the outlining of the camouflage. So what I'm going to use here is some white tack. Don't use blue tack. There's oils in blue tack that will affect your paint. But if you use white tack, you won't have a problem. Basically a case of rolling out some sausages. And then once we've done that, we can refer back to the kit instructions in regards to our camouflage pattern. So once we've got that all marked out, we then need to fill in the centres. So using a bit of masking tape. If you're very careful when it comes to airbrushing, you can get away with just using the white tack sausages. But just to make sure, we're going to fill this in. So once we've done that, we can come in with our dark earth. Again, this is thinned about 70%, so 70% thinners, 30% paint. So what we're going to do is start spraying 90 degrees to the model. This will provide us with a nice feathered edge to the camouflage. So we're using the mottling technique just to build up the colour. Now the fun part, the unmasking. So now that we've laid down the two colours here, we can start to see it coming together. So we can see here, we're starting to build up that tonal variation in the paintwork. Just provides a bit more interest for the eye when you're looking at the model. By the time we start to apply the markings and further on in the build when we start to apply weathering, this will tie everything together. It's important that you get the camouflage pattern to meet up, so I'm just demonstrating here the fitting of the tail planes, just to get that camouflage pattern to join the fuselage. And we've masked up the demarcation line between the camouflage and the underside colour. Just be aware on the marking option B, which is S for sugar, this is much higher up the fuselage, covering over the side windows. And I'm just masking up using a couple of cocktail sticks to plug the gaps in the front blister. Make sure we don't get any overspray inside when we come in with the XF69 NATO black. We've also masked up the leading edge of the wing, again to get that nice demarcation between the top camouflage colours and the underside colour. So now we're coming to spray the demarcation line that's specific to S for sugar. So if you notice in the kit instructions, we've got a slight bit of overspray on this demarcation line. And again, checking reference photos, it's quite noticeable. So what I'm trying to do here is replicate what I see in the photographs. So it's quite highly thinned down paint. This is the XF69. So now we're on to the markings. So these are made by Cartograf, they go down really well. So we're starting off, I'll show you how to do a couple. So we've got a tub here of warm water, it's just room temperature. Once we put the marking in, we're just going to lay it flat, leave it to soak. Then we're going to come in using some micro set. So this is the first part of the setting solutions we're going to use. Just getting a coat of that down. Just checking to see this is starting to move on the backing paper, which it is. So now it's just a case of sliding it off into the roughly the right position. What we're doing now, we're just pushing any water out from underneath it and getting it into the final position using a pair of tweezers. Then once we're happy with that, we can use a cotton bud. So working from the centre to the outsides, we're basically pushing all that water out and allowing it to adhere to the surface. Just to note, this is going straight down onto the XF69 paint. We haven't clear coated at this point at all. And now we're coming in using some micro sol. This is the second part of the setting solution. Just needs a light coat over the top. You should see it starting to wrinkle up. Don't panic, just leave it to dry. So this is coming back to the next day. This is the result we've got so far. So it's starting to bed down, but it's not quite there. So what we're going to do is basically apply as many layers of this microsol as we need till we're happy. So what I'm doing here is using a polishing stick. I'm just going over the areas we're going to put the markings down, just so it's a nice smooth surface. So this is a problem I encountered with the kit. The walkways aren't quite long enough to match up with the roundel. So as you can see here, the positioning of this roundel on the wing needs to be roughly in this location here. But if we do that, the walkway doesn't join up with it. If we are to get the walkways to join, the roundel itself is actually too far inboard. If you check references and the kit instructions, they're both indicating to have it further outboard of the wing, roughly in this position, as I'm trying to demonstrate here. So you can see the edge of the roundel meeting up with this actuator for the aileron. About there. So it's okay, the walkways join at the back, but the ones on the leading edge of the wings are a few centimetres short. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put this down on the wing, and we'll try and get it in a position we're happy with. So the same process as before. We've just soaked the marking in water, leaving that to come free of the backing paper. We're coming in using our micro set. And once we're happy with this marking starting to move, we can offer it up to the wing and remove the backing paper. So now what I'm trying to do is manipulate this to get it in a position I'm happy with. So you can see here, we've got it a bit closer to this walkway. There we go, we've got things to line up. Personally, to my eye, it looks too far inboard in this position here. And again, checking my references, it should roughly be around about this position on the wing. So what I've decided to do, we're going to lay this decal down where it is. Same thing again, just pushing all the water out from the centre. Just finalising the position here. And once we're happy, we can come in with a cotton bud, and working from the inside out, pushing all that water off. So we've got this part here of the decal that's interfering with the actuator for the aileron. So what we're going to do is basically make sure it's lined up. And rather than sort of push it down into place, we end up sort of cracking the decal itself. We're just going to come in with our micro saw and we're going to let that do the work for us. So we're going round just giving everything a good coating, and we'll leave that to dry and we'll see what we come back to in the morning. So it's the next day and you can see the markings have laid down really well. What I've had to do, you can maybe see here, I've robbed a couple of walkway markings from another kit just to sort of make these walkways join up. They're not perfect, but we'll deal with that later on in the weathering section. And now what I'm doing is actually cutting the decal itself. So we're running the knife down the panel lines. This will allow the decal to bed in perfectly to the surface. Make sure it is dry before you do this, and also make sure you use a sharp knife. We don't really want to tear the marking if we can avoid it. So it's just basically a case of going round, popping the knife in the panel line, and just running that round. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cover this again using micro saw, and we'll leave that to settle down. So you can see already it's starting to bed in. So now we're moving on to the actual nose insignia itself. Again, we're putting this straight down onto XF69, which is a flat surface. So we just need to polish the area slightly, just so it's nice and smooth. So hopefully you can see that there. Just coming in there with a polishing stick. Just give it a quick rub round. Once we're happy with that, we can use the same process we've done before to get these markings on. So we can use the same techniques as before just to do the rest of the markings. So now we've got the exhausts and the flame dampeners to fit as well. Just showing you here how they should look when they're done. But one thing to note, so we've got a couple of locating points on the actual nacelle itself, but these are actually injection points for the moulding. So what you need to do is make sure you've cleaned these out. I only noticed this when I came to fit these parts and I just could not get them to sit properly. And then I realised we need to clean these out, so I'm using a scraper here, but you could also use a hobby knife. Once we've done that, these parts fit really nicely. But one thing to note, these are specific to each nacelle, so these ones to the inner nacelle, and these ones on the outer nacelle, and the same on the other wing, so just be aware of that. A couple of tabs here just locate on the nacelle itself. So the easiest way to check that is obviously by test fitting before you come in with glue. But they won't fit on the outer nacelle. So if you're having frustrating problems with that, that's the reason why. So another part to note is the kit exhausts. So we've got a couple of these tabs which are designed to locate within the actual engine block that we built in part 2. I just couldn't get these parts to fit together at all. Possibly because we've used paint between the surfaces, this could be affecting the fit. So I thought the best solution would be we cut these tabs off and we'll sand the exhaust flush, removing all that paint that we've got on it so far. This was just giving a quick coat of LP11. So now we're using our slower setting Revell Contactia glue, just running a bead of that down the back of the exhaust, and then just getting it in the right location of the nacelle itself. Just holding that in place till it gets a grip. And then what we can do is just check the alignment from the front, just by looking down the side of the engine. I'm just putting the flame dampener on here just to check, make sure this is going to fit. We're not going to have any interference with the exhaust sticking out the side of the engine block. So we're quite happy with that, so we can move on to the other side. Same process again. Just get these in the right sort of position. So once we're happy with the position and the fit, we can come in with the glue. So we've done the other side as well. Really starting to come together now. And here's what we've got so far. So what we've done, I'm just showing you here, we've filled the walkways in using some decals from another kit. But hopefully you can see how well these have gone down. So again, hopefully you can start to see the overall mottling work that we've done as well, which will make more sense. We'll start to weather this down in the next episode. We'll go through washes and oils and exhaust staining and everything else we need to do to try and make this look more like the real thing and less like a toy. But really happy with the build so far. So we've got the markings on the underside as well in place. And you can see that sort of variation that we put down between the primer and the XF69. But we'll emphasise this in the next episode when we move on to the weathering stage. And again, at this point, I haven't shown it, but I've also painted the flap section in the interior colours as well. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, give us a like. And if you want to, you can subscribe, you'll get a notification of when the next part is out. So join me in the next part, and until then, have a good one.